In today's tutorial, we're going to learn how to create this particular sci-fi DNA. It's abstract and there are other methods of creating DNA, but I think this is a much simpler version that you can do in about 5 minutes. So let's start it off. We're going to take our default cube, hit X and delete it. And then we're going to go to our edit preferences and we're going to go to the add-ons tab over here and search for extra objects and just tick the one next to add curve. So we need the add curve extra objects and make sure that it's checked over here and then hit save preferences and close. Now when you hit Shift A, under curves, you should see a lot more options. One of these options is curve profiles, and underneath that you can search for the helix 3D. Down here you get a lot of settings to it, and for this particular tutorial we're going to just change the height to something like 3 and then we can go ahead and close. Now when we add it, it's going to by default be in edit mode and we're going to keep it in edit mode, and then we're just going to make sure everything is selected by tapping A to select everything and then Shift D to duplicate and hit enter. Then hit RZ 180 to give it a 180 degrees phase shift. And there we have our double helix, which is going to be our base for the sides of our DNA. We can hit tab to go back to object mode, go to our curve properties over here. Under geometry, we can go ahead and just increase the bevel depth to something like 0.01 so that it's visible, maybe 0.002 as well. So now we can hit 3 on our numpad to go to the front orthographic or the side orthographic view and just make sure that everything is as it should be. So now we can hit Shift A, search for curve, and under the curve we're going to see line. Of course we can do this with various other objects, but we're just going to use line for now. We're going to hit 3, then rotate it on the x-axis by 45 degrees and then hit minus just to make sure it's flat. Then scale, make sure you press Control to just scale it down by equal increments, and then G, make sure you hit Control so that it stays snapped to grid and just move it down there. Now hit 7 and we'll see that it's still rotated. So we're going to hit R, Z and just rotate it by 35 degrees till it's there. G, X, move it back and it should be in the right place. So now when we double tap A, you see it's a little bit too small. So again, tap A and just scale it until the edges touch, just like that. So now that we have that, we can go back to the object properties of this and just increase the bevel depth to something like 0.01 so that we have one particular line. So now we have to add in an array modifier to this, but we want it to shift up with the curve spiral. So we're going to hit Shift A, search for an empty plane axis, and we're just going to grab the empty on the z-axis by 0.2, and we're also going to rotate it on the z by minus 24 degrees. So why we did that is because when we add in our array modifier, which we're going to add in from here, modifier array, we're going to switch off relative offset, we're going to switch on object offset, and we're going to select our empty as the object. And now as we increase our count, you'll see it perfectly follows our path. Why we did that is because in our initial curve settings, when we added in this curve, we could see that it goes 360 degrees and we changed the height to 3 meters. So in 3 meters, it turns 360 degrees. So every 0.2 meters, it should be moving by 360 divided by the number of lines that are going to be there. And since we're putting each line 0.2 units above the previous one, to reach 3 units, we'd get 3 divided by 0.2, which is equal to 15, and we'd get 360 divided by 15 to get 24 degrees for every rotation. And if we actually put plus 24, we'll see that it rotates in the opposite direction, so we put minus 24. Now we can go ahead and just increase the count to 15. And of course, since we started from down here, we can add one more, so it's going to be 16. So there we actually have our double helix structure for our DNA. Now we can just go ahead and place our camera. So let's select our camera, Alt G to clear location, Alt R to clear rotation, then RY 90, RX 90, then GX, bring it back. And now we can go to our output properties and change the resolution to a vertical aspect ratio 1080 and 1920. Change our frame rate to 30 frames per second. Change our end frame to 300 so that it's a 10-second long animation. Change our output folder to the folder in which it's saved, so double slash. Change the file format to FFmpeg video, and encoding change from Matroska to MPEG-4, and output quality to perceptually lossless. Now hit 0 to go into the camera view, then go to camera and just under viewport display, make passport out 1. Now we can go to our object properties over here and just move it up on the z-axis by a little bit, change the rotation on the y to 0, move it front on the x-axis so that we get a closer view, and just move it up by a little bit. Now that we have our camera positioned, we can just add in our animation. So let's select the lines inside our DNA and we want to apply the array modifier. So we can't apply the modifier, as we'll see over here. We can't just apply it. It has to be an object. So we're going to have to go to object, convert to mesh. Once we do that, the modifier gets applied. And now we can shift select our actual helix and then hit Control P, set parent to object. So now when we actually rotate the helix about the z-axis, the lines follow. So now make sure that you're on frame 0 and not frame 1 and hit I, rotation, and then go to frame 300, which is our last frame, and then hit R, Z, 360 or minus 360 based on your preference, and then hit I, rotation. And now make sure that you have both the keyframes selected in the timeline. Make sure your cursor is in the timeline, hit T, linear. So now we can actually see it rotate. Now that we have our actual structure animated as well, we can go ahead and move forward to the shading. So let's switch to our rendered viewport shading and bring our cursor here, click and drag to open a new window, change that to the shader editor, and then go to our material properties and just add a new material. Hit N to remove this side panel. Now we want the edge to be emissive, and in order to make all of the emissive things look good, we're going to go to our render properties, switch on bloom and switch on screen space reflections. Now if we just put up the emission here, it becomes too strong. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete our principal BSDF. We're going to search for a emission shader and we're going to place that into the surface for now. Now we're going to make sure that the color is a nice gradient. So we're going to search for a gradient texture and we're going to search for a color ramp, and we're going to place the color into the factor and the color into the color, and we're going to change the color of black to a nice blue like this, and maybe this one to a darker blue, something like this. So what we're also going to do is go to our world properties and just make the color of the world all the way to black. Now if you actually look at the gradient texture, Control Shift clicking it with the node wrangler switched on, you can tell that the gradient is not exactly where we want it to be. So we hit Control T on the gradient with the node wrangler switched on and then change from generated to object. So now we have one side as a nice bright white and the other side as black. So if this is what you want, you can go ahead and Control Shift click the emission and use something like this. But if this is not the type of gradient that you want, we can go ahead and just change the properties by rotating it around on the y-axis by 90 degrees and then just moving it up on the x-axis till we get somewhere around there. Make sure we bring this back so that the gradient is much smoother. We could also change this from linear to B-spline so that's an even smoother fall off. You can always change the location and the scaling accordingly. So now that we have this, we can go ahead and just increase the strength by quite a bit. But now it becomes a bit too overpowering and we want only the edges to be lit up. So in order to do that, we're going to search for a mix shader. We're going to place the emission into the second socket and we're going to create a mask. So we're going to search for the layer weight node and we're going to search for a color ramp node. We're going to place the facing into the factor and the color into the factor of the mix shader. Now if we pull in the black, you can see how just the edges begin to light up. So we can increase the strength to give it that nice bloom. If you're not happy with the colors, you can always go ahead and change them around and just play with them till you get something that you are happy with. Now that we have the material for the outer edges completed, we can go ahead and just select our actual lines and give it a new material. Again, switch off overlays so that we don't see it. Go ahead and increase the metallicness all the way to 1. And also it's currently being overpowered by the lamp. So we're just going to select our lamp and delete it because we don't require it. Now go back to our lines and reduce the roughness quite a bit. So this is just going to make all of it reflect the light within the scene. And this is about it for the shading of our double helix. Now we just need to add in a floor element. So we're going to hit Shift A, Mesh, Plane. We're just going to scale that up by quite a bit. And now we're going to hit New for that as well. Go ahead and increase the metallicness all the way to 1. Then we're going to hit Shift A, search for a Voronoi texture, Shift A color ramp, and then place the color into the factor and just place this color into the roughness. Now we can just play around with the scale. So increase it to something really high, maybe something like 300. This is based on how large you've scaled up your plane, and play around with what you think looks good. Whether you like color, which gives nice sharp edges, or you like the distance, which gives these more organic looking edges. It's really personal preference at this point, but you can always switch off overlays and just see what works well with your particular scene. You can play around with the color ramp to get different looks and also change the black to a slightly lighter gray and make the white also slightly darker. So that way nothing becomes completely reflective or completely rough. So just play around with it till you get something that you actually like. And once you're done with that, you can always go ahead and just render the animation by hitting Render Animation. Hopefully, this was a really short one where you learned something useful, maybe the extra object's curves, or the use of layer weight nodes, or the array modifier. If you create anything using these concepts, feel free to tag me on Instagram at the IN Academy, and you can always share your work in the comment section below. Ask queries or suggestions, tips, tricks, anything you'd like. I'll keep posting as many as I can, and until next time, stay creative.